Okay, today we're going to be talking today in class about life on the home front. Yeah, as we've discussed before, President Lincoln has a plan. It's called the Anaconda Plan. Well, at this point in the war, we see that the Anaconda Plan is actually working very well. Remember, Lincoln was criticized for his Anaconda Plan at the beginning of the war, but now we start to see that the plan was actually a smart plan and it's working out well. If you remember on our map that we had of the South, we showed that Lincoln had Navy ships that surrounded all the way down the east coast of the United States, all the way down up underneath Florida and into the Gulf of Mexico. And the orders were given that if you see any ships leaving any ports or coming in from other countries or other places, that they were to be warned and then turned back around. So Lincoln's plan begins to work. He wanted to cut off all supplies to the South, thinking that if we do this, if we cut off all the supplies to the South, then the South will give up and will want to end the war. Okay. Remember also that there were few factories in the South. This is going to be a big problem because this means that they had few items such as weapons, clothing, and other supplies for the Southern soldiers. Now, about midway through the Civil War, we begin to read in journals by the soldiers of the South where they are describing the horrible conditions on the battlefield. We've talked in class about this, that many of the soldiers, they simply had no food. It was also that way for the Southerners, the civilians as well, those not fighting in the war. They had no supplies either. So what do you do in those times when everything is gone? Southern women had to work in the fields, and they had to manage the farms and take care of the family at night because their husbands or brother or sons or whomever it might be, their male figures in their lives are gone off to war, and so therefore that leaves the women here to work. Many of these Southern women were extremely wealthy women, and they were not used to this kind of work out in the fields, and so now we see that that's what they're going to be doing now, as they're out in the fields working, and life begins to get worse for the Southerners. Okay, we also learned with all the supplies being cut off to the South, the Southern soldiers, their uniforms. They have no one to make them new uniforms. There are very little factories here in the South. And with very little factories, that means that somebody has to make uniforms or mend or repair the uniforms when they're torn up in battle. And so many of the soldiers towards the end of the Civil War, we start to learn that their uniforms are just totally, they're just rags. There's nothing for them to wear, really. However, the women in the South would often get together. All the women in a community would get together, and they would make uniforms for the soldiers. One phrase I remember reading about at one point, it was called socks for the soldiers. The women would sit and they would darn and they would make socks for the soldiers of the South because they had no supplies. Women also had a job of caring for the wounded. Women become the main caregivers for the sick and the wounded. They visit and they helped out at hospitals, and we're going to be talking about that today. We'll be discovering or exploring what did women do. Well, that was one of the things that they did, was oftentimes went to the battlefield and offered their assistance at the hospitals. One particular lady that's extremely important from this time period is Clara Barton. You will be reading about her today and learning why she is so famous. Okay, another problem that they're beginning to face in the South is hunger. We can't get those supplies that we need. We learn at this time that the plantations are in terrible shape with all the fighting that's taken place in the South. These big farms are oftentimes destroyed. The soldiers, when they were hungry, they would sneak off from the battlefield or from their camp where a farm may be nearby. They'd steal the cattle, the pigs. They would steal any crops that were growing, because let's remember they're starving. They've got to have something, and so things are going to continue to get worse. As the war continued, conditions got worse. That means things are just terrible in the South. Farms were ruined, and there was no money to rebuild. It's like a major storm had come through and destroyed everything, and nobody has any money to rebuild because the Confederate money is no good. Soldiers often stole to survive. I mean, let's face it. I'm going to do the same thing. If I'm out of money, if there's no food around, you're going to do something to provide for your family. And probably most important, believe it or not, is the fact that there was no salt. Now, we rely heavily on salt to flavor our food. They did as well to preserve their food, but there's no salt. What are we going to do? Your book tells that in some situations people were even pulling the boards up from their kitchen floors, looking on the dirt below the house, trying to find any salt that may be that may have fallen through the cracks. Also, we learned that many people would dig up dirt during this time, and they would sift it out and they would boil it and try to get whatever minerals and salt they could find in the dirt. And that's how bad things were. Okay, today, that wraps up our lesson for today. You're going to spend time in class reading about Clara Barton. We are going to research together about conditions on the home front. Your assignment today is going to be that I want you to pretend to be a soldier, either on the battlefield, and I want you to write a journal entry in a diary or on a piece of paper describing for me just kind of what we just learned about. Describe for me what it would be like from a soldier's point of view. Ladies, your job is going to be pretend you are one of the girls or the women left at home. Your husband's gone, your I don't know, brother or whomever you'd like for it to be, your father is gone, and you have to stay and help take care of things on the farm. How would you survive? What would you do? Okay, we'll talk about that for just a few minutes, share some ideas, and then we'll get started with today's activity. Hope you have a great day.